The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its crystalline walls reflecting the nervous energy of 1,000 alien delegates. Ambassador Kexthara of the Zephyrian Empire stood at the central podium, her 4 arms gesturing dramatically as she delivered what would become known as the most consequential speech in galactic history. Fellow beings of the Council, her voice resonated through universal translators. We can no longer ignore the threat that humanity poses to our civilized galaxy. Their expansion has been relentless, their technology development unprecedented, and their military capabilities frankly terrifying. The chamber buzzed with agreement from dozens of species. The crystalline Veltar chimed in harmonic disapproval, while the gas-form Nethians shifted their containment fields anxiously. Even the ancient Carathians, who had witnessed the rise and fall of 3 galactic civilizations, nodded their massive stone heads in solemn agreement. Human Ambassador Sarah Chun stood alone at the defendant's platform, her simple blue diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial garments surrounding her. At barely 5.5 feet tall, she appeared insignificant among beings that range from 20-foot crystalline entities to massive stone creatures older than her entire species. In a mere 2 centuries since first contact, Kexthara continued, humanity has expanded from a single world to controlling over 400 star systems. They've reverse-engineered our technology, improved upon it, and, in some cases, created innovations that surpass our own achievements spanning millennia. The Carathian delegates' voice rumbled like an earthquake through the chamber. They wage war with a ferocity unknown to civilized species. Their military doctrine speaks of concepts we thought extinct: total war, scorched earth tactics, victory at any cost. They are a species born from conflict, shaped by violence. Ambassador Chen requested permission to speak. The chamber fell silent as she stepped forward, her voice calm despite the weight of accusation surrounding her. Honored delegates, humanity has never initiated aggression against any council member. Every conflict we've engaged in was defensive in nature. We've shared our medical advances freely. Our agricultural innovations have ended famine on 17 worlds, and our disaster relief efforts have saved millions of lives across dozens of systems. The Zephyrian's laugh was like grinding metal. You speak of aid while building the largest military fleet in the galaxy. Your ships carry weapons capable of cracking planets. Your soldiers are trained killers who view death as preferable to defeat. Tell us, Ambassador, why should we believe your species seeks peace when every aspect of your culture glorifies conflict? Chen's jaw tightened. Because conflict shaped us into survivors. Because when the universe threw everything it had at us, ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts, world wars, we refused to break. We learned to adapt, to overcome, to protect what matters. That strength doesn't make us monsters. But the Council had already made its decision. The vote was overwhelming, 847 in favor, 23 against, with 156 abstentions. Humanity was to be expelled from galactic civilization, their trade agreements terminated, their diplomatic posts closed, their colonies beyond the local group to be abandoned within 1 standard year. The formal decree was read by the Council Chancellor, a being of pure energy contained within a geometric lattice. By unanimous decision of the Galactic Council, the human species is hereby banished from civilized space. All human presence beyond the local group of galaxies must cease within 12 standard months. Any human vessels found in Council space after this period will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. As the chamber erupted in approving chimes, clicks, and harmonics, Ambassador Chun stood motionless. The weight of representing an entire species in this moment pressed down on her shoulders like a collapsing star. The journey back to Earth took 18 days aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony. Chen spent most of it in her quarters, staring out at the stars that would soon be forbidden territory. Her aide, Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, found her there on the final day before arrival. Ambassador, we'll be entering Earth's solar system in 6 hours. The President wants a full briefing upon arrival. Chen didn't turn from the viewport. Tell me, James, what do you see when you look out there? Morrison joined her at the window. Stars, ma'am. Billions of them. I see opportunity, Chen said quietly. For 2 centuries, we've been trying to fit into their mold, play by their rules, prove we're civilized by their standards. But we're not them, James. We never were. Mom. Chen finally turned, and Morrison saw something in her eyes that made him straighten unconsciously. It was the look his grandmother had described seeing in soldiers' eyes during the Third World War. A terrible, beautiful determination. They're afraid of us because we're different. Because when every other species in the galaxy faced their first extinction-level event, they called it fate and prepared to die gracefully. When we faced ours, we called it Tuesday and got to work. The viewport showed Earth growing larger, its blue oceans and white clouds a stark reminder of humanity's small place in a vast, hostile universe. But Chen saw something else in that fragile sphere: potential. They want us gone? Fine. We'll show them what happens when you corner the one species in the galaxy too stupid to know when they're beaten. We'll build something out here they never imagined possible. As the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Chen began composing her report to the president. The galaxy had rejected humanity, but humanity was far from finished. In fact, she suspected they were just getting started. Below them, Earth waited, not as the backwater world the Council saw, but as the heart of something unprecedented. A civilization that had learned to thrive in isolation, to turn rejection into strength, and to transform exile into opportunity. The Galactic Council thought they had solved their human problem. They had no idea what problem they had actually created. 5 years had passed since the Great Rejection, as historians would later call it. Earth's response had surprised even its own citizens. Instead of despair, the banishment had triggered the largest cooperative effort in human history. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of Titan Station, watching the construction of humanity's most ambitious project. The massive ring structure stretched across space, its incomplete sections revealing the scale of their undertaking. Around her, engineers from every nation worked alongside each other, their old rivalries seemingly forgotten in the face of their shared exile. Status report, Dr. Chun, Elena said into her communicator. The name was no coincidence. Sarah Chen's daughter had followed her mother into service, but chose science over diplomacy. The quantum anchor points are stable, came the reply from Dr. Lisa Chun, who is currently floating in a maintenance pod 3 kilometers away. We're ahead of schedule on the particle acceleration arrays, and the exotic matter containment field is holding steady at 99.97% efficiency. Elena smiled. When the project had been proposed 3 years ago, half the scientific community had called it impossible. The other half had called it insane. They were building a gateway, not just to other star systems, but to other galaxies entirely. The Galactic Council had banned humanity from their space, the local group of galaxies that contain the Milky Way. But the universe contained trillions of other galaxies, and humanity intended to reach them all. Captain Marcus Rivera approached, his magnetic boots clicking against the station's deck plating. The former Space Marine had lost his left arm in the last conflict with Zephyrian raiders, but the cybernetic replacement was proving more capable than the original. Admiral Yamamoto wants to see you in the Strategy Center, he said. We've received another transmission. Elena nodded and followed him through Titan Station's corridors. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering, built in the shadow of Saturn's largest moon. Unlike the elegant, flowing designs favored by other species, human architecture was boldly functional. Every surface served multiple purposes. Every space was optimized for efficiency. The Strategy Center hummed with activity. Holographic displays showed the positions of human fleets across local space, while other screens tracked the construction progress of similar gateway projects around a dozen different star systems. Admiral Kenji Yamamoto stood before the central display, his weathered face showing the strain of the past 5 years. When the Galactic Council had given humanity 1 year to evacuate all holdings beyond the local group, many had expected compliance. Instead, humanity had begun the largest military and logistical operation in their history. Show her the message, Yamamoto said without preamble. The central hologram shifted to show Ambassador Kextara, her 4 arms gesturing in clear agitation. To the human leadership, this is your final warning. Our patrol fleets have detected massive energy signatures from your gateway projects. These constructions violate the spirit of your banishment. Cease this activity immediately or face the consequences. Elena raised an eyebrow. The spirit of banishment? We're operating entirely within the local group. What's their legal argument? There isn't one, said Dr. James Walsh, the project's legal advisor and former galactic law specialist. They're worried about what comes next. Admiral Yamamoto activated another display showing galactic intelligence reports. Our deep space monitoring stations have intercepted communications between Council fleets. They're mobilizing a task force, the largest military operation in galactic history. The room fell silent. Elena studied the data, her scientific mind racing through calculations. How large? 12,000 ships from 43 different species, Yamamoto replied grimly. They're calling it the Pacification Fleet. Captain Rivera's cybernetic hand clenched into a fist. Let them come. We've been preparing for this possibility since the banishment. Elena walked to the primary console and began inputting commands. The display shifted to show human force deployments across the local group. What she saw would have been impossible to imagine just 5 years ago. Humanity hadn't just built gateways. They had weaponized their exile. Around Earth, massive orbital defense platforms bristled with weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of physics. The old International Space Station had been expanded into a fortress complex that spanned thousands of kilometers. Every asteroid in the system had been hollowed out and converted into either a weapons platform or a shipyard. But the real surprise was the fleet composition. Humanity had abandoned the Galactic Council's ship design philosophy entirely. Where Council ships were elegant and efficient, human vessels were brutal and pragmatic. Where Council doctrine emphasized minimal casualties and diplomatic solutions, human strategy embraced the ugly reality of total war. Our shipyards have produced 8,000 vessels, Yamamoto continued. They're not as large as Council ships, but they're faster, more maneuverable, and carrying weapons systems the Council has never encountered. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the communicator. Elena, you need to see this. We've achieved stable portal formation. The gateway to Andromeda is online. Elena felt her heart race. The Andromeda galaxy, over 2 million light-years away, far beyond the reach of any Galactic Council authority. Through the observation windows, she could see the massive ring structure beginning to glow with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. Admiral, she said quietly. How long before the Pacification Fleet arrives? 6 months, assuming they maintain current acceleration. Elena nodded and opened a channel to Earth's command center. This is Dr. Vasquez. Initiate Protocol 7. Begin immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel to the Andromeda staging areas. Yamamoto looked surprised. You're abandoning the local group? I'm ensuring our species' survival, Elena corrected. But we're not running away. We're ensuring that no matter what happens here, humanity continues. And in Andromeda, we'll have time to prepare for the real war. Real war? Elena smiled. And it was the same expression her former ambassador mother had worn when facing the Council's judgment. The Council thinks they're dealing with a rebellious member species. They have no idea they've just created the first truly galactic civilization in the universe's history. Through the gateway, streams of human ships began their journey to Andromeda. Each vessel carried not just people and supplies, but the accumulated knowledge of a species that had never learned to surrender. The Pacification Fleet was coming to end the human threat once and for all. Instead, they would discover that they had given humanity the greatest gift possible, a reason to exceed every limitation that had ever been placed upon them. The Battle of Seoul began at 1432 Universal Standard Time on a Tuesday that would forever divide galactic history into before and after. Commander Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching 12,000 alien vessels emerge from faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space. The granddaughter of the original ambassador, Chun had inherited more than her ancestors' diplomatic post. She had inherited the family's stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Fleet composition confirmed, reported Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. Zephyrian battle cruisers leading the formation, flanked by Carathian dreadnoughts and Veltar precision frigates. They brought everything, Commander. Sarah nodded, studying the tactical display. The Pacification Fleet was indeed impressive, 1,000 years of galactic military evolution arranged in perfect battle formation. But, as she watched, she noticed something that brought a grim smile to her face. "They're still flying in ceremonial formation," she observed. "Maximum visual impact, minimal tactical flexibility. They came here to make a statement, not to fight a war." Admiral Chin's voice crackled over the fleet communication system. Sarah's aunt had taken command of the Seoul Defense Force when Admiral Yamamoto departed for the Andromeda colonies. "All human vessels, this is Fleet Command. Execute Prometheus Protocol on my mark." Across the solar system, humanity's response began to unfold. It was not what the pacification fleet expected. The first surprise came from the asteroid belt. What the Council's intelligence had dismissed as mining operations suddenly revealed their true nature. Thousands of asteroids began moving under their own power, their surfaces splitting open to reveal massive weapon systems. On the flagship of the pacification fleet, Admiral Kextara watched her sensor displays with growing confusion. What were those objects? Our intelligence indicated minimal human military presence in the outer system. Her tactical officer, a young Zephyrian named Velcad, studied the readings with increasing alarm. "Admiral, those asteroids are accelerating toward our position. Energy readings indicate they're powered by antimatter drives." "Asteroids don't have antimatter drives," Kextara said dismissively. "Recalibrate your sensors." That's when the second surprise hit. The space around Earth itself began to shimmer and warp. What had appeared to be empty space suddenly filled with ships, thousands of them, emerging from stealth fields that had kept them hidden for months. But these weren't the ships the Council expected. Human vessel design had evolved rapidly during their exile, abandoning aesthetic considerations entirely in favor of pure functionality. The ships were angular, brutal things that looked more like flying weapons than spacecraft. "New contact signatures," Velcad reported, his voice rising. "Estimate 4,000 human vessels decloaking around Earth." "Admiral, these ships don't match any design in our database." On the Defiance, Sarah Martinez opened a channel to the pacification fleet. "Unknown vessels. This is Commander Martinez of the United Earth Space Force. You are in violation of human territorial space. Withdraw immediately." Kextara's response was swift and predictable. "Human Commander, by authority of the Galactic Council, you are ordered to surrender your vessels and prepare for occupation. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force." Sarah looked around her bridge at faces that had grown up in exile, young men and women who had never known the galaxy's acceptance and therefore felt no need to seek its approval. "Copy that, Council forces. Our response is simple. Come and take them." The battle began with the asteroids. Traveling at significant fractions of light speed, the weaponized asteroids struck the pacification fleet's outer formations with devastating effect. But these weren't simple kinetic weapons. As they impacted enemy shields, they deployed swarms of smaller objects, each one a sophisticated AI-controlled weapon system. "What is this?" Kextara demanded as her beautiful formations began to disintegrate under assault from enemies too small for her heavy weapons to effectively target. "Our intelligence said nothing about swarm technology." The Council's mistake was assuming that humanity's technological development had stagnated during their exile. Instead, forced to innovate in isolation, human engineers had pursued development paths that the galaxy's established civilizations would never consider. Where the Council built large, impressive ships crewed by hundreds or thousands of beings, humanity had embraced automation and artificial intelligence. A human vessel with a crew of 50 could deploy weapon systems equivalent to a Council ship 10 times its size. Where Council doctrine emphasized battlefield honor and minimizing casualties, humanity had embraced the ugly mathematics of total war. Every human ship carried enough firepower to cripple vessels many times its size, because humans had learned that in real war, there were no style points for fighting fair. The second wave of the human attack came from Earth itself. The planet's surface erupted with launch signatures as thousands of automated defense platforms revealed themselves. But instead of firing at the distant fleet, they launched their payloads toward predetermined points in space. Minutes later, those payloads arrived at their destinations and began to unfold. Each one became a fully functional weapons platform, powered by compact fusion reactors and armed with weapons systems that violated several galactic conventions on civilized warfare. They're using quantum entangled targeting systems, Velcad reported in horror. Our electronic warfare countermeasures are completely ineffective. Admiral Kextera watched her proud fleet beginning to suffer losses that should have been impossible. Council ships were individually superior to human vessels in almost every way. Better shields, more powerful weapons, more sophisticated systems. But the humans weren't fighting ship-to-ship duels. They were fighting a completely different kind of war. All vessels, break formation, and engage targets of opportunity, she ordered. We'll show these primitives the power of true galactic civilization. That's when the third surprise revealed itself. The human fleet didn't spread out to meet them in individual combat. Instead, they maintained tight formations and began executing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. "How are they moving like that?" demanded the Carathian admiral from the dreadnought Stone of Ages. "Our gravity sensors indicate impossible acceleration curves." The answer would have horrified the Galactic Council if they had understood it. Humanity had weaponized their greatest weakness, their desperation. Unable to match Council technology through normal development, they had pursued research that other species considered too dangerous. Human ships were powered by controlled singularities, miniature black holes that provided virtually unlimited energy at the cost of making every vessel a potential extinction-level event if damaged. Human crews accepted these risks because they had been raised in a civilization that viewed acceptable losses differently than the rest of the galaxy. As the battle raged across the solar system, Sarah Martinez coordinated her squadron's assault on a formation of Veltar precision frigates. The crystalline ships were beautiful, their weapons accurate to an almost artistic degree. But they had been designed for surgical strikes against military targets. Human weapons had been designed to destroy anything that stood in their way, military or civilian, beautiful or ugly. When the Defiance opened fire, her quantum cascade torpedoes didn't just damage the Veltar ships. They converted their crystalline structures into energy, erasing them from existence. "Admiral Kextera," Sarah transmitted on an open channel, "this is your last warning. Withdraw your forces, or we will demonstrate why the galaxy was right to fear us." The response came not in words, but in action. The pacification fleet's heavy units began charging their planet-killer weapons. Sarah smiled grimly and opened a channel to Fleet Command. "Aunt Chun, they're going for planetary bombardment. Should we show them what we learned about fighting dirty?" "Do it," came the reply. "Time to introduce the galaxy to human rules of engagement." The moment Admiral Kextera ordered the deployment of planet-killer weapons, humanity's response revealed why the Galactic Council's greatest mistake wasn't banishing them. It was giving them 5 years to prepare for this exact scenario. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in bunkers that extended to the planet's core, the activation codes were entered. Project Damocles, humanity's most classified defense initiative, came online. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched from the Titan Station Command Center as Earth itself seemed to come alive. Across the planet's surface, massive structures emerged from hidden underground installations. These weren't weapons in any conventional sense. They were something far more terrifying. "Gravitational manipulation field generators are online," reported Chief Engineer Kim from Earth's surface. All 17 installations showing green across the board. What the Council fleet witnessed next would forever change their understanding of what a desperate species could accomplish. Earth began to move. Not orbit adjustment or minor course correction. The entire planet shifted its position in space, sliding aside, just as the first planet-killer beams passed through the space it had occupied moments before. Admiral Kextera stared at her tactical display in complete shock. "Planets don't move," she whispered. "It's impossible. The energy requirements alone would." "Admiral," her science officer's voice cracked with fear, "they've turned their homeworld into a spacecraft. The entire planet is under artificial control." The implications hit the pacification fleet like a shockwave. A species that could move planets had no need to respect conventional understanding of warfare, physics, or acceptable risk. But Earth's evasive maneuvers were just the opening move. Commander Sarah Martinez watched from the Defiance's bridge as the real demonstration began. "All vessels, implement Scorpio formation. Let's show them what we learned during the Exile Wars." The human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions, but not randomly. Each ship moved to precise coordinates calculated to maximize a devastating tactical revelation. During their 5 years of exile, humanity hadn't just built new weapons. They had fundamentally reinvented the concept of warfare itself. Energy spikes detected across the human fleet, reported Velcad from the Zephyrian flagship. Admiral, they're powering up weapons systems that aren't showing up in our database. That's because the weapons humanity now deployed had never existed before their exile. Forced to innovate beyond conventional parameters, human engineers had created devices that the Galactic Council would have banned if they had imagined such things were possible. The first new weapon was relatively simple in concept: quantum entanglement bombs that could transfer their explosive force directly into the interior of enemy vessels, bypassing shields and armor entirely. The elegant Council ships, designed for spectacular exterior defenses, found themselves exploding from within as their own structural materials were converted into antimatter. The second innovation was more subtle, but equally devastating. Human ships began releasing clouds of what appeared to be simple metallic dust. Council sensors dismissed it as debris until the dust reached enemy vessels and began to replicate. "What is this substance?" demanded the Carathian admiral as his massive stone dreadnought began to dissolve from the outside in. "It's consuming our hull." "Self-replicating nanomachines," Sarah Chimartinez replied over the open channel. "We call them entropy swarms. They convert any matter they encounter into more copies of themselves. Don't worry, they're programmed to stop after consuming exactly one ship's worth of material." The third weapon was perhaps the most psychologically devastating. Human ships began launching projectiles that moved at impossible speeds, not faster than light, but at significant fractions of light speed without visible propulsion systems. "Temporal manipulation," Elena Vasquez explained to her shock staff on Titan Station. "We learned to fire weapons backwards through time. Those projectiles left our ships 30 seconds before we actually fired them." Across the pacification fleet, sophisticated tactical computers began experiencing cascading failures as they tried to calculate defensive responses to weapons that violated causality itself. But the true horror for the Council forces wasn't the exotic weapons. It was the tactical doctrine humanity employed. Council warfare had evolved over millennia to emphasize honor, minimize casualties, and preserve valuable infrastructure. Human doctrine had evolved over 5 years of exile to emphasize a single principle: whatever it takes to win. They're targeting life support systems specifically, reported a Veltar captain whose ship was slowly suffocating as human nanomachines consumed only the atmospheric recycling equipment. "They're trying to force surrenders through crew casualties rather than ship destruction. Because forcing surrender is more efficient than destruction," Sarah replied when the transmission was forwarded to her. "Dead enemies can't give us information about Council technology and tactics. Surrendered enemies can." The battle began turning into a rout as Council commanders realized they weren't facing a rebellion. They were facing the emergence of civilization that had abandoned every constraint the galaxy considered fundamental to civilized warfare. Admiral Kextera, finally, understood the magnitude of her mistake when her own flagship began experiencing systematic failures. Human boarding pods had somehow penetrated her shields and were depositing assault teams directly into critical ship sections. "How did they get through our defenses?" she demanded. "They didn't," her tactical officer replied with barely controlled panic. "They teleported. Matter transmission technology is supposed to be impossible at these energy levels." "Everything we do is supposed to be impossible," came Sarah's voice over the communication system. "That's what happens when you give a species 5 years to figure out how to kill you specifically." What followed wasn't a battle in any sense the galaxy would have recognized. It was a systematic demonstration of what happened when a species optimized entirely for survival encountered opponents who had optimized for millennia of civilized coexistence. Human fighters swarmed Council formations like angry insects, too small and fast for capital ship weapons, but carrying enough firepower to cripple vessels 100 times their size. Human capital ships moved like dancers, their gravity manipulation systems allowing impossible maneuvers while their temporal weapons struck targets before defensive systems could even detect the attack. But perhaps most terrifying of all was the psychological warfare. Humanity had studied every species in the pacification fleet during their exile, learning their cultural fears and psychological weaknesses. Council ships found themselves subjected to targeted attacks on their deepest species-specific phobias. Crystalline Veltar ships were exposed to harmonic frequencies that induced their racial fear of shattering. Gaseous Nethians were confronted with containment fields that triggered their species' claustrophobic terror. Even the ancient Carathians found their stone ships subjected to rapid temperature changes that awakened their primal fear of weathering and erosion. Surrender, Kexteroff finally transmitted on all channels. We surrender. Please, no more. The human fleet stopped firing immediately, but they didn't stand down. Sarah Martinez opened a channel to the defeated pacification fleet. Admiral Kexteroff, you are now prisoners of war. Your vessels will be escorted to our processing facilities where your crews will be treated according to our interpretation of civilized behavior. You will discover that our definitions may differ somewhat from yours. In the silence that followed, Elena Vasquez transmitted from Titan Station to the galaxy at large. To the Galactic Council, this is humanity. Your pacification fleet has been defeated with minimal human casualties. Your vessels and crews are safe and will be returned when we receive formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty over the local group and reparation for the unprovoked attack on our homeworld. She paused, then added the words that would echo through galactic history. We told you 5 years ago that banishing us was a mistake. Today, we've shown you why. Earth's arms remain open to any species that approaches us in peace. But attempt to harm us again, and you'll discover that we've only just begun to show you what we learned in exile. The Battle of Sol was over. The real war for humanity's place in the universe was just beginning. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The defeat of the pacification fleet hadn't just ended a war. It had shattered every assumption about power, civilization, and what it meant to survive in the universe. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood once again before the Galactic Council, but the chamber was different now. Half the delegates' seats were empty, their occupying species having withdrawn from the council in the aftermath of humanity's victory. Those who remained looked at her with expressions ranging from fearful respect to barely concealed terror. The polished obsidian walls now displayed a new addition, holographic screens showing live feeds from across human space. The images were deliberately chosen to demonstrate how much had changed during the 7 years since humanity's banishment. Earth still hung in its familiar orbit, but it was no longer recognizable as the world the Council had dismissed. Massive orbital structures surrounded the planet like a metallic shell, and streams of ships moved constantly between the surface and space installations that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever constructed. But the most shocking displays showed the Andromeda Galaxy. Where once there had been empty space between galaxies, now streams of human ships moved constantly through their quantum gateways. In just 7 years, humanity had established colonies in over 40 galaxies, each one connected by the instantaneous transportation network that made them effectively a single, vast civilization. The Galactic Council recognizes Ambassador Chun, announced the Chancellor, though their energy lattice flickered with what could only be described as nervous patterns. Sarah stepped forward to the podium, no longer standing alone. Behind her stood representatives of 17 non-council species who had made contact with humanity during their exile, civilizations that the Council had never encountered or had dismissed as too primitive for membership. Honored delegates, Sarah began, using the same formal address her grandmother had employed 7 years earlier. I come before you today not to seek readmission to your organization, but to offer an alternative. The chamber erupted in surprised chatter from the remaining delegates. This wasn't the outcome anyone had expected. Victory should have brought demands for restoration and reparations, not offers of partnership. During our exile, Sarah continued, humanity discovered something remarkable. The universe is far larger and more diverse than your Galactic Council has ever imagined. We've made contact with over 800 sentient species across 42 galaxies. Many of them have technologies and perspectives that make your 1,000-year-old methods seem primitive. She gestured to her companions. Allow me to introduce the architects of Sculptor Galaxy, who manipulate dark matter itself. The synthesis from Centaurus A, who have learned to merge organic and digital consciousness seamlessly. The navigators of the Whirlpool Galaxy, who traverse dimensions your physics cannot even detect. The remaining council delegates stirred nervously. The Carathian representative stone features showed what might have been concern. You speak of impossible civilizations. Our deep space monitoring would have detected such advanced species. Sarah's smile was patient, but carrying an edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Your monitoring covers less than 0.1% of this galaxy, and none of the others. During our exile, we learned that the reason you've never found truly advanced civilizations isn't because they don't exist. It's because they learned to avoid species like you. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now Director of Humanity's Galactic Relations Division, activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. It showed a three-dimensional map of local galactic clusters, but instead of the empty space the Council expected, it revealed a vast network of civilizations. This is what the universe actually looks like, Elena explained. Thousands of species connected by instantaneous communication and transportation. Trade routes spanning multiple galaxies. Collaborative research projects that pool the knowledge of beings whose evolutionary paths are separated by billions of years. And they all avoid this galaxy, added Kextara's replacement as Zephyrian representative, a younger diplomat named Valandra. Why? The answer came from one of Sarah's companions, a being of crystalline light that spoke through harmonic resonances translated into audible speech. Because, the architect from Sculptor Galaxy explained, your civilization represents something we encountered and abandoned millions of years ago. You have confused technological advancement with wisdom, military power with strength, and dominance with leadership. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Galactic Council, which had seen itself as the pinnacle of civilized development, was being told they were a developmental dead end. Sarah stepped forward again. We're not here to condemn you or seek revenge for our banishment. We're here to offer you a choice. Join the real galactic community as equals, or continue your isolation until your civilization inevitably stagnates and collapses. And if we refuse, asked the Veltar representative, their crystalline voice ringing with suspicious harmonics. Then, you refuse, Sarah replied simply. We'll continue building our network of galaxies, helping species develop beyond the limitations you've accepted as permanent. Eventually, your descendants will find us when they outgrow the borders you've drawn around their possibilities. Admiral Chun, now Director of Human Space Operations, activated another display. This one showed the current military balance between humanity and the Council. The numbers were staggering. Humanity now controls fleets in 42 galaxies, she reported matter-of-factly. Our combined military capabilities exceed those of the Galactic Council by several orders of magnitude. But, more importantly, we've learned to do something you never figured out. We've made war obsolete. The delegates stirred in confusion. The Carathian admiral, still traumatized from his experience at Sol, managed to speak. How does one make war obsolete? The answer came from Elena Vasquez, whose scientific mind had always sought elegant solutions to complex problems. By making cooperation more profitable than conflict. Every species we've encountered has been offered the same choice we're offering you today. Join a network where everyone benefits, or remain isolated and eventually be left behind. No species has chosen isolation. Added the synthesis from Centaurus A, whose partially digital consciousness allowed them to process multiple conversation threads simultaneously. When you can access the knowledge of 800 civilizations instantly, when you can travel to any of 42 galaxies in minutes, when you can participate in research projects that dwarf anything possible on a single world, why would you choose to remain alone? Sarah looked around the chamber at faces that showed a mixture of fear, confusion, and growing understanding. These beings had spent centuries building a civilization based on careful control, gradual progress, and the assumption that their way was the only viable path to advancement. We're not asking you to abandon your cultures or surrender your independence, she said gently. We're asking you to stop limiting yourselves to what you think is possible and start discovering what actually is possible. The Council Chancellor's energy lattice pulsed with what might have been deep thought. And if we agree to join this network, what becomes of the Galactic Council? It becomes what it should have been all along, Sarah replied. A local coordinating body for this galaxy, working in cooperation with similar organizations across the universe instead of pretending to be the ultimate authority on civilization itself. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than many expected. Of the remaining council species, 63 voted to join humanity's galactic network, 41 voted to maintain their isolation, and 96 abstained pending further study. As the session concluded, Sarah found herself once again standing where her grandmother had received humanity's banishment. But this time, she wasn't alone, and she wasn't pleading for acceptance. The Human Galactic Network welcomes all species who choose to join us, she announced to the chamber and to the galaxy beyond. Our arms remain open, as they always have been. We'll be here when you're ready. As she left the chamber, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought humanity to this moment. Banished for being too dangerous, too different, too willing to break the rules, they had used that exile to become something the galaxy had never imagined possible. They had become the bridge between what was and what could be. The galaxy that had rejected humanity was discovering that humanity had never needed their acceptance. They had needed only what Earth had always provided, the freedom to grow beyond the limitations others placed on them. The universe, as it turned out, was far more vast and welcoming than the small portion of it that had tried to keep them out. And now, for any species brave enough to take the journey, it lay open before them like an infinite ocean of possibility. Earth's arms, as they had always been, remained open to all who approached in peace.